Welcome back to the Serengeti Synergy, where we take a deep dive into African issues that matter. Today, I want us to explore a topic that affects each and every single person living in our continent: food security and food sovereignty. This is not a topic about agriculture. It goes beyond that. It's about power, it's about economics, it's about climate, it's about our right to determine our own food future. Food sovereignty goes beyond you having enough to eat. It goes beyond your neighbor having enough to eat. Food sovereignty, as described in Mali in the year 2007, is, and I quote, the right of people to healthy and culturally appropriate food that is produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and the right to determine their own food and agricultural systems. Food sovereignty puts the aspirations and needs of those who produce, distribute, and consume food at the heart of all food systems and policies, rather than the demands of the market and corporations. So from this, we are basically saying that food sovereignty can be defined as the act of actually listening to every single person and what they actually need, instead of getting the metrics that determine what we plant, how we plant it, from corporations and what the market demands. When we talk about food sovereignty, we are discussing about who actually controls our food systems. We are asking very fundamental questions about who grows our food. We are asking how is our food processed, and we are asking who makes all the decisions of the food that ends up in our plates and how that food ends up there. This concept actually recognizes that food is just not a commodity that we consume. Food is a right. Food is a cultural cornerstone that communities should actually have some control over. The numbers tell a very striking story. Despite our continent possessing about 65% of the world's remaining uncultivated arable land, we spent about $64 billion in the year 2017 as a continent importing food into the continent. Just think about that paradox for a minute. Our continent has great agricultural potential, and yet every year we spend billions of money importing food from the Western world, importing food that we can grow ourselves but choose not to. But the question is why? This is clearly not economically sustainable. It is a threat to our sovereignty as a continent and our resilience. We cannot have a conversation about food dependency without talking about colonial legacy. The roots of our current food dependency actually have deep roots and are deeply entrenched into our colonial past. When European powers restructured African economies, and by restructured it started with them placing borders in our continent, they were not thinking about feeding all the Africans that live in our continent. They were focused more on resource extraction and producing and planting cash crops for export. What many people do not realize is how these colonial agricultural systems determine and actually are long-lasting even after independence, and they shape our current relationship with food production to date. Let's take an example of Ethiopia and Niger in the year 2005, because there was a major disconnect that was revealed in the food systems there. Ethiopia experienced bumper harvests because of heavy rainfall, favorable weather, and the fact that they actually have effective policies, and their farm inputs and outputs showed this. They had surplus in food production system. Meanwhile, just across the border, Niger faced extreme food shortage. This was due to droughts, and there was actually locust invasions in that particular year. But despite food being abundant in one country, Ethiopia, people were starving in the neighboring nation, Niger. This is just not a failure in distribution. It is a symptom that our food systems were not designed to prioritize feeding local populations. Similar pattern was actually seen in 2017 between Ethiopia and South Sudan. Regions in Ethiopia had sufficient rainfall and a lot of harvests, while neighboring South Sudan, people were dying of hunger because of drought, and this was made worse by the fact that they were in conflict. Food could not move between these two countries due to infrastructure gaps and political instability in the region. These two examples just highlight how current systems actually fail to connect African countries and the fact that even though some African countries might have abundance, the Africans who actually need it do not get it. Let me be clear about something that is not said enough in my opinion. Africa has no business importing more food than it exports. Period. None whatsoever. With all the natural resources that we possess, we should be feeding ourselves, and the surplus that we produce should be going to the rest of the world. I mentioned earlier that we have about 65% of the world's remaining uncultivated arable land. And also to add to that, we have about 300 days of sunshine every single year in most regions in our continent. This means that even though more than 60% of Africa's working population is actually engaged in agriculture, it is very sad that this agricultural sector accounts for less than 1/7 of our GDP as a continent. This shows that something is fundamentally wrong. The Africa Development Bank actually recognized this disconnect and developed the Feed Africa strategy, and this was meant to transform African agriculture into a global, competitive, inclusive, and business-oriented sector. The goal of this was to end extreme poverty, was to eliminate hunger, and actually to deal with malnutrition. And this also had a general aim of making Africa a net exporter of African agricultural commodities to move to the top of key agricultural food value chains. This is just not wishful thinking. This is economic imperative to the continent. Transforming our agricultural sector would actually create a lot of new markets, and the estimates are saying that at least $85 billion per year in added revenue by the year 2025. That potential return in itself is at least worth 100% of the investment. But the critical question still remains: who will own and control these new markets? Will it be African farmers? Will it be African markets controlled by African people and businesses? Or will we see another cycle of external control by the West? We cannot discuss about food sovereignty without addressing two major issues that go hand in hand with this. Number one is climate change. Number two is soil degradation. These twin threats are already affecting production all across the continent and threatening the future of food security. A study was done in 2014, and it revealed a lot of alarming statistics about the soil health in Africa. Land degradation has impacted about 65% of all land, that 30% of all grazing land, and 20% of all forests. This is fundamentally huge. Approximately 180 million people are actually living on degraded land, and this creates a perfect storm if you combine low crop yields and the ever-growing population in our continent. While the average yield in sub-Saharan Africa is about 1 ton per hectare, India produces about 2.5 tons for the same hectare, and China exceeds about 3 tons per hectare. This just shows that we have a fundamental challenge in our agricultural systems, and it is a crisis that threatens the very foundations and policies that we're trying to put in place for our food systems. Climate change compounds on these soil issues. It makes what is already worse very, very worse, because we have very unstable weather patterns, and sometimes rain comes, rain does not come, and our agricultural sector in Africa heavily relies on rainfall. So as the land degrades, yields decline even further, and this creates a downward spiral that pushes more people into food insecurity. The solution requires a very integrated approach. There is no single magic bullet for this. There is no single magic solution that will improve soil fertility. We need to combine solutions that include both agroecological practices and appropriate use of inputs, example, fertilizer. We must invest in climate-smart agriculture that actually builds resilience while improving productivity. We have some success stories. It is not all bad. Organizations like Alliance for Food Sovereignty of Africa are working to strengthen community-led agroecological practices and fight the vested interests that undermine them. These efforts actually focus on rebuilding food systems that blend indigenous agricultural knowledge with best practice for agricultural research, basically traditional agricultural methods with what the future might hold. And this strengthens domestic food production and actually provides secondary benefits of improving human health and environmental stewardship. One of the most important tools for building food sovereignty is just at our fingertips. It's a solution that we have spoken a lot on, but we are having a very big problem implementing it all across the continent. Intra-African trade, trading between African nations. The 2023 Africa Agricultural Trade Monitor actually reported and highlighted this. Trade has clear potential to improve food security by increasing the availability of and access to food through a variety of channels. Improved intra-African trade means that more income from and for farming communities, and it does a lot for job creation by enabling them to purchase what they actually need. This also means that there's a greater variety of food that is actually coming from vast regions, and this gives the consumer, the end consumer, me and you, a wider choices and improving nutritional standards. When one region experiences any form of excess rainfall, flooding, drought, food can flow from all the other surrounding areas which have surpluses, ensuring that we have a system whereby not even a single African person goes hungry. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area represents a historic opportunity for us to reshape our agricultural markets. By reducing barriers between African countries, we can actually create food systems that prioritize African production for African consumption. And this will reduce our collective dependency on imports from outside our continent. So where do we go from here? Building true food sovereignty in Africa requires coordinated action across multiple fronts. Firstly, I see as if we must prioritize investment in African agricultural transformation. Statistics say that about $30 to $40 billion a year for the next 10 to 15 years need to be invested into transforming African agriculture. It seems like a lot of money, but if you actually think about it, if African governments fulfill their CAADP commitment, which is to allocate about 10% of all national budgets to agriculture and rural development, this would not be a hard task to achieve. Secondly, we need to focus on rehabilitating our soil health. How do we do this? We do this by training our farmers in agroecological methods that build soil fertility while at the same time producing nutritious food. It also means addressing land degradation through reforestation, through water management, and through sustainable grazing practices. Thirdly, we must strengthen the position of the smallholder farmer. The smallholder farmer actually produces the majority of the food that we consume as Africans. This includes improving their access to markets. We need to give them appropriate technology, and we need to make sure that they can access financial services to allow them to expand their businesses. Women farmers, who actually form the backbone of many agricultural communities all across the continent, need very particular and very specific support to overcome systemic and cultural barriers to resource and decision making. Finally, we need to reclaim control over our seeds and agricultural knowledge. Traditional seed variety adopted by local conditions provide resilience against climate change and preserve cultural food traditions. Seed sovereignty, which is defined as the right of a farmer to save, use, exchange, and sell their own seeds, is a fundamental concept to food sovereignty. They go hand in hand. Unfortunately, the seeds that we have now in the continent are buy one, use one, and we do not allow the farmer to regrow. This is a fundamental issue. So as we conclude, I would want to introduce a concept here called food substitution. The truth is, we need to have a nutritional balance in what we consume. Scientists give approximates that we're supposed to consume 30% carbohydrates, we're supposed to consume 30% vegetables, and we're supposed to consume 40% protein. If you do the math, we can get the vegetables in Africa, we can get the protein in Africa. Carbohydrates is the issue. That's why we import a lot of wheat, we import a lot of rice. But what if we actually took the route of food substitution? What if we actually took the stance that we do not consume what we do not grow? So instead of making rice, wheat products, the staple source of carbohydrates for every family that lives in Africa, let's replace that with cassava. Let's replace that with arrowroots. Let's replace that with carbohydrates that we can grow locally and that can be acquired from all our African neighbors. This looks like part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So, as we've seen, food sovereignty is not just about agriculture. It's about power, it's about self-determination, it's about the future of our continent. As climate change intensifies all across the globe, global food systems face an ever-increasing instability. Africa's ability to feed itself becomes not just an economic opportunity, it becomes a strategic necessity. COVID-19 pandemic showed us a lot. The war in Ukraine showed us a lot. They both revealed how vulnerable our import-dependent food systems are to global shocks. As the African Union recognized in adopting the 2022 theme of strengthening resilience in nutrition and food security of the African continent, food sovereignty is no longer an option, it is a necessity. By investing in our agricultural system, by supporting smallholder farmers, by improving soil health, by considering food substitution, and by strengthening intra-African trade, we place control of food system back into our African hands, and we can build a future where not even a single African goes hungry, and where our abundant agricultural potential finally translates into prosperity for every single person. This has been the Serengeti Synergy. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and remember, our food future is in your hands. Thank you.